Right, the New York Times and Washington Post report that President Trump's lawyers and aides are looking for ways to discredit special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation into Russian connections. The New York Times even suggests that the Trump administration is taking a page from the Clinton administration, which publicly challenged independent counsel Kenneth Starr in the 1990s. Want to bring in two folks intricately involved in both and all of this. CNN political commentators Jason Mueller and Paul Begala. Jason worked for the Trump campaign. Paul worked for President Bill Clinton. Now they both work for CNN, so they have to answer my questions. Jason, I want to start with you here. Is the White House and the outside advisors are they all now trying to discredit the investigation, present the idea of a conflict of interest? Because it sure sounds like that when the president was interviewing with the New York Times.
Well, John, I'm not part of the president's external legal team, nor am I part of the external communications team. But what I can speak to here is the fact that it sounds like these lawyers are doing their job, which is to go through and look for every pushback point that they have to go and make the case that they're defending the president and to make sure that we're rooting out any conflicts of interest. This is what they're supposed to do. And in fact, if anything, I think the White House would be wise to continue to follow the playbook that the gentleman sitting next to me helped implement 20 years ago. This guy was an absolute genius, calling out the corruption and the witch hunts and such, and calling out the political dynamics of an investigation we saw 20 years ago. And Paul Begala helped write the book, and I think the Trump White House would be smart to go and follow that because, look, here's the bottom line. Right after the election, it was the talk about Hillary Clinton winning the popular vote in an effort to try to discredit the Trump presidency.
She did win the popular vote.
Well, it's a way to undermine, saying that President Trump wasn't really the president. That's really what all that talk was. Well, then we go to the supposed. Let me,
because I'm not sure the popular vote has anything to do with the Bob Mueller investigation. But let's go to your first point, which is, Paul Begala, you did have an awful lot to say about an indication.
I still do. Don't get me started. Call me in $70 million in 5 years when Mueller is investigating Donald Trump's sex life. It's a completely different situation. First, we had a special counsel in Whitewater named Robert Fisk, a career prosecutor, Republican, who was investigating Whitewater. Not a peep from us. Full cooperation, no criticism of the Fisk investigation. He was a legitimate prosecutor like Mueller. Mueller's a career prosecutor. Ken Starr, the Whitewater case was his first case. As a prosecutor, he never did a traffic ticket. He was put in there by a very political process. Republican federal judges forced him in, and he started right away looking into Bill Clinton's sex life. It has nothing to do with real estate. It's a completely different situation. It's not going to work. Jason, I can tell you, Starr was an incompetent. Starr was politically biased. Starr was forced in there, and he was sex obsessed. Mueller, excuse me, no, I didn't interrupt you. Mueller is a war hero and a career prosecutor and FBI director. On top of that, President Trump, I sometimes get caught saying that, President Trump, our president, my president, goes out of his way to attack Judge Gonzalo Curiel, who's presiding over a civil case that he's involved in, demeans him for being a Mexican-American. He attacks the rest of the federal judiciary, calls them so-called judges because he doesn't like how they rule in the travel ban. This is an all-out war on the rule of law by our president.
That's not at all what this is about. What this is about is making sure that this investigation stays focused on what this investigation is supposed to be about, which was there some supposed coordination between the campaign and a foreign entity, which the answer is no. And they can keep digging and keep looking, and the answer is no.
We haven't had the investigation.
There was nothing.
But by the way, there's one other really important distinction. No matter how much we criticized Ken Starr, the President Clinton, had no power to fire him. He did not work for us, and that made us more free to be able to criticize him because he didn't work for us. Bob Mueller, at the end of the day, is not protected by the law that protected Ken Starr, because that law, thank God, has lapsed. It was a crummy law. But when President Trump goes after Mueller and after the Attorney General and the Justice Department, he is purposefully trying to undermine the rule of law, the investigation into whether or not he was corrupt.
Jason
if he was
Miller,
so innocent, he wouldn't be acting
Rod
like this.
Rosenstein, who is the person who appointed Special Counsel Robert Mueller, the directions, his charge for Robert Mueller was to look into, the connections, the possible things that might come up in the Russia investigation, which he hasn't determined yet, by the way. You say it's over. It's not over yet. But also, matters that may come up in the investigation, which lawyers, Jonathan Turley, even lawyers who have defended the president in some cases here will note, is an incredibly broad parameter right there. Matters that may come up in the course of the investigation. If the investigation turns up things of questionable legality, why not look into that?
And I think it's perfectly fair for this administration and the administration's legal team to call out what appears to be a big fishing expedition. I think it's perfectly fair for the administration to call out where there might be conflicts of interest. This is what legal teams are supposed to do, or to go and call, set this, what the stage should look like, and to go and communicate their message to people. I think they're doing their job, and it's good to see that they're pushing back.
I agree with that. No one's above criticism, including Mr. Mueller, who is a war hero with an unblemished record, and his team. The problem is, as I said before, when you fit it into the context of this all-out war of our president, attacking the Attorney General, the Deputy Attorney General, the acting FBI Director, the former FBI Director, federal judges, this guy is like, I'm telling you, he is like one pair of sunglasses and epaulets away from standing on the Truman balcony, you know, rolling the tanks up the Constitution Avenue.
One of the things that Trump allies have pointed out is that there are members of Robert Mueller's staff who gave to Democrats.
Right. Which raises the important question, so what?
Well, would you, if this were reversed, you wouldn't point out that Ken Starr had a bunch of...
Absolutely, but then let's look at the proof. Let's look at how they conduct their investigation. Again, Starr was appointed to investigate a real estate deal. He winds up prying into Clinton's sex life. Mueller has been appointed to investigate whether not just the president, but larger entities corruptly tried to bias our election. And other matters that come up, like obstruction of justice and perjury. And we got to at least let him do his job. Let him try.
Jason, should the president fire Robert Mueller?
Oh, I'm not going to wade into that, but I think the point that Paul is getting to, or if you look at it from my perspective, is what Democrats are really upset about here is the fact that Hillary Clinton lost.
No.
And they're trying to have this cloud.
But here's the thing: is that actually Democrats were not involved in the president talking to the New York Times in suggesting there should be parameters of Bob Mueller's investigation. They weren't in that interview, nor were they part of these stories that came out in the New York Times and the Washington Post overnight talking about Robert Mueller. This is a thing with the president.
We see the partisanship coming from the Hill every single day.
Do you see it coming from Robert Mueller? Do you see partisanship coming from Robert Mueller?
I haven't seen anything yet, but I think it's smart for the president's legal team to go ahead and make sure that they're pushing back to make sure there aren't conflicts of interest, and I think they're doing their job.
Jason,
but again, this is about, we have to remove this cloud. We have to get back to doing what people elected President Trump to go do.
Will he cooperate? Bill Clinton even had to give blood to Ken Starr. Will our president obey the rule of law and turn over his taxes if Mueller asks them?
All right, stay tuned.
Team say they're going to cooperate.
That will be in our next episode of the Russia investigation, guys. Thanks so much. Allison, to you.
Of As the Stomach Turns, one of their favorite soap operas. Meanwhile, so how much authority does the president have in terms of pardons? Of course, he can pardon his aides. Can he pardon family members? Can he pardon himself? We discuss the law straight ahead.
We love this job, we love this department, and I plan to continue to do so as long as that is appropriate.
All right, that's Attorney General Jeff Sessions right there. He says he is here to say, after the president's extraordinary public criticism in the interview with the New York Times, the president's rebuke really making waves now inside the White House. One official tells CNN, no one was more loyal than Sessions. No one. Another calls this chilling. The big question is loyalty a one-way street with President Trump? I want to bring back our panel, David Drucker, Jeffrey Toobin, and David Sanger. You know, David Drucker, again, the question we're hearing from inside the White House. Jeff Zeleny is reporting, look, if the president will do this to Jeff Sessions, will he do it to anyone?
Well, anyone probably other than his close family members. I think here what is very, very interesting and important is that when you do this so publicly to a member of your administration, a cabinet official, and usually this is done third hand, so I guess you got to give the president credit here for not outsourcing this, is that you've completely undercut Jeff Sessions' power and influence, because the way politics works, especially in a West Wing, but even on Capitol Hill, is it's all about how much juice you have with the principal. And now, in a tug of war over policy, if Jeff Sessions gets into one, his adversary can say, you know, I don't think the president has that much confidence in your leadership. He was pretty public about that, so I don't really care what you think. And it creates a situation where, especially if Jeff Sessions, as Attorney General, is carrying out some of the president's more prioritized initiatives, which he is, because on policy and on a lot of the key things that the president campaigned on, it's within Jeff Sessions' purview to handle these things. I think it weakens his ability as Attorney General to carry this out. And you know, we talk all the time about, you know, here, well, this one's going to have to leave and there's no way he can stick around. But you really look at the tongue lashing that Jeff Sessions got You look at his career in the Senate, and you wonder how long he can stick around in this situation.
Yeah, I mean, Jeffrey, it's not. It's also the public tongue lashing. I mean, it's not unusual to be displeased with a member of your staff, but to vent your spleen publicly to the New York Times about them does seem to be unusual.
Well, it's unusual. It's weird. Choose your adjective. But I also think, Jeff Sessions is still the Attorney General, and he can do all the things that Attorney Generals do. And yesterday, he announced a major cybercrime investigation. I mean, I think part of what makes this so weird is that in many respects, I don't think Sessions is all that weakened by it. I think he's going to continue doing his job, and unless and until the president actively throws him out, I don't think he is in really that much trouble. I think just the weirdness of this administration is that the president free associates in public a lot, but I think Jeff Sessions is still in the position to do the job he was hired to do.
And it was interesting, with Jake Tapper yesterday, several Republican members of the Senate, 3 on background, 1 on the record, Susan Collins, actually, rallied behind Jeff Sessions there. So maybe, in a way, Jeff Sessions, a former senator, will get more senatorial congressional support now that the president's attacking him. Could be one of the strange ironies here. David Sanger, next week, speaking of Congress, a lot going on up there in terms of the investigation. Jared Kushner heading up, he will talk to the Senate Intelligence Committee, not under oath, but he will speak to them behind closed doors, some staff members there. And then the Judiciary Committee waiting for a response from Donald Trump Jr. and former campaign chair Paul Manafort to see if they will testify on Wednesday. And there is this threat of a subpoena if they don't. Part of me cannot imagine what it would look like with Donald Trump Jr. testifying there. On the other hand, part of me can't imagine the fact that, the president's son would have to receive a subpoena here. Where do you see this heading?
Well, it's a little bit hard to tell because those two people, Mr. Manafort and Donald Trump Jr., are not government officials. Manafort, of course, famously was fired as the campaign chairman, and Donald Trump Jr. has never taken a position in the administration. So they are not covered by any kind of executive privilege, any of the protections that usually go around somebody who works for the president. While Mr. Kushner is because he's got an appointment within the White House. So it's going to be would be very difficult for the two of them to be able to resist the subpoena. Now, they could show up and testify and invoke the Fifth, and this is more Jeff's territory than my own, but that probably wouldn't look very good, especially after Donald Trump Jr. has said publicly, and I think you have to believe him on this, that he's perfectly willing to cooperate with the committee and go out and explain this entire meeting. And, of course, the White House has said, and Donald Trump Jr. has said, that this was entirely innocent, that even though they were there to receive what they described as dirt on Hillary Clinton, in fact, none was delivered and nothing came of the meeting and everybody went away. And that's the argument they have to be able to make in public and in private.
I think Manafort in particular would be insane to testify without immunity. No lawyer in the world would advise him to testify. His finances are obviously in a focus of this investigation by Mueller. Putting him in a position where he might make false statements would delight Mueller to no end. I think Donald Trump Jr. has less to fear criminally, but the big beneficiary, if those two testify under oath, will be Robert Mueller, because he will have juicy new targets to investigate.
And one thing I think we need to remember with these subpoenas, and this is very interesting, and my Republican sources were reminding me of this last night, the subpoena that the Judiciary Committee is going to issue doesn't have any teeth unless the full Senate votes to enforce it. This is not a court of law. And so the only way the marshals are going to go after Manafort or Donald Trump Jr. if they ignore the subpoena and don't want to testify is if the Senate goes on record enforcing it, and that could be a very tricky political maneuver for a Republican Senate.
Very quickly, gentlemen, I just want to give you a snapshot of how Americans are feeling right now. Here's a new CNN poll. This is about the Russian meeting. Should Don Jr., Kushner, Manafort have taken the the meeting with the Russian lawyer. 23% of respondents say yes, 57% say no, 20% say unsure. Now, if you look at it by party, Don Jr. should not have taken the meeting with the Russian lawyers. Democrats say 83%, independents 55%, Republicans 36%. So that is telling. We'll leave it right there. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being with us on the panel. We have some breaking news to get to right now, John.
Your size. You get 100 Camerata.
We want to welcome our viewers in the United States and around the world. This is New Day. It is Friday, July 21st, 6 o'clock here in Washington, D.C. Chris is off and John Berman joins me from New York. Great to see you, John.
Nice to see you.
Here's our starting line. The New York Times and the Washington Post reporting that President Trump's legal team is trying to undermine special counsel Robert Mueller by looking for conflicts of interest in order to discredit his Russia investigation. The Washington Post also reporting that the president is asking advisors about his ability to pardon his aides, his family members, and even himself.
Meantime, one day after President Trump warned the special counsel not to dig into his family's finances, Bloomberg reports that special counsel Mueller's investigation is expanding to do just that. All this as CNN learns that President Trump is shaking up his legal team. The president unhappy with how his lawyers are fighting back against the daily Russia revelations. We have this all covered for you. A lot going on. We're going to begin with CNN's senior Washington correspondent Joe Johns live at the White House. Good morning, Joe.
Good morning, John. The reshuffling of the president's legal team comes around the same time he's sending signals that he's gearing up for a fight against special counsel Robert Mueller's legal team, citing conflicts in an interview with the New York Times. This comes amid reports the president is seeking to undermine the investigation. The New York Times and Washington Post are reporting that the president's lawyers and aides are looking to undermine the special counsel's investigation. The Times says Trump's team is scouring the professional and political backgrounds of Robert Mueller and other investigators, looking for conflicts of interest they can use to discredit the investigation. The Post also reporting that the president has been asking about his authority to pardon aides, family members, and even himself in connection with the probe. Attorney General Jeff Sessions refusing to answer questions about whether he's discussed pardons with the president in testimony before Congress last month.
I'm not able to comment on conversations with high officials within the White House.
All this as the Russia investigation appears to be widening. Bloomberg reporting that Mueller is expanding his probe to include a broad range of financial transactions involving Trump businesses and associates.
Would that be a breach of what his actual
I would say yes. Yeah, I would say yes.
The president warning Mueller against delving into his finances earlier this week.
The president's making clear that the special counsel should not move outside of the scope of the investigation.
The Washington Post reports that the president has told aides he's especially disturbed after learning that Mueller would be able to access his tax returns. The president has refused to release them, citing ongoing IRS audits. Mueller has broad latitude. Sources say the president has also vented in recent weeks that his legal team has not done enough to beat back allegations.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Sources tell CNN Mark Kasowitz, the president's longtime attorney and lead lawyer on the Russia matter, will see his role reduced after the spokesman and communications strategist for the legal team resigned.
Mr. President, does Jeff Sessions still have your full support?
Thank you, everybody.
President Trump ignoring questions about his embattled attorney general after blaming him for the special counsel probe.
Sessions should have never recused himself. And if he was going to recuse himself, he should have told me before he took the job, and I would have picked somebody else.
Sessions signaling Thursday he has no plans to step down, despite the president's remarkable public rebuke.
We love this job, we love this department, and I plan to continue to do so as long as that is appropriate.
Despite this morning's reports, a source says the president's team does intend to cooperate fully with the special counsel. The focus on the special counsel and the president's own words in that New York Times interview overshadowing, if you will, the attempts of this administration once again to focus on policy. Today, we do expect to see the president this afternoon as he meets with the survivors of the USS Arizona. John and John, back
Allison,
to you.
I'll take it now. Thanks so much,
okay.
Joe. All right, so lots to discuss. Let's bring in our panel. We have CNN political analyst David Drucker, CNN senior legal analyst Jeffrey Toobin, and CNN political and national security analyst David Sanger. Great to have all of you. David Drucker, I'll start with you because you and I are together here in Washington. So let's talk about this. Is the thinking of President Trump's legal team that if anyone on Mueller's team has ever, say, given money to a Democratic candidate, that they therefore cannot be unbiased and impartial, and that would somehow taint the investigation?
Well, I think that's the message that the president is trying to send. In some ways, this is reminiscent of the special counsel, special prosecutor that looked into President Bill Clinton, where there was an all-out war from the White House trying to discredit Ken Starr so that any result of his investigation would be tainted. And so what you're seeing here from this president, with the difference that the president can actually, although it would be complicated and politically explosive, could actually fire Mueller because there's no longer a special prosecutor law protecting Mueller. But what the president is trying to do, like he tries to do with all of his political adversaries, is undermine his credibility and legitimacy. So at least in the eyes of his very loyal base and the broader Republican electorate, which has kept the Republicans on Capitol Hill at bay because they still support him, they are not going to buy anything that Mueller comes up with. And I think that's the shot across the bow that we've seen this week.
You know, it's been really interesting. I mean, in a way, the president's interview with the New York Times was Chekhov's gun. You know, we saw the gun in the first act, the president talking about conflicts, and then overnight in the New York Times and the Washington Post, these stories are, you know, pointing out alleged conflicts as a concerted, you know, direction that they're doing from this legal team. Let me read you what the president said again in that New York Times interview. Mueller was up here and he wanted the job. The next day he is appointed special counsel. I said, what the hell is this about? Talk about conflicts? But he was interviewing for the job. There are many other conflicts that I haven't said, you know, subtext, but may come out tomorrow night in the Washington Post and New York Times. You know, Jeffrey Toobin, what is a real conflict of interest which would be grounds for Rod Rosenstein to fire Bob Mueller?
I don't think. It's hard to know in the abstract of what is a conflict of interest.
If Robert Mueller was talking about the FBI job, would that be a conflict of interest?
Absolutely not.
If there were political donations from people inside Mueller's team to some Democrats, and we know there were, is that a conflict of interest?
It is certainly not a conflict of interest justifying firing. You know, as a journalist who spent a good deal of time investigating Ken Starr and his staff and their political inclinations, I think it is entirely fair for Trump's team to point out if Mueller is hiring lots of partisan Democrats. I don't think he is, but if that's true, it's a perfectly legitimate issue for Trump's people to investigate. They are not Mueller. Mueller is the decision maker, and if there is a less political person in a prominent place in American life, I don't know who it is. Mueller is a very clean and apolitical record.
So, David Sanger, much of this comes from the New York Times reporting, your outlet, but there's also some Washington Post reporting this morning that says that the president and his team are also exploring how far-reaching the president's pardon authority is. Obviously, the implication is if Don Jr. were in trouble, maybe if Jared Kushner were in trouble, what could the president do about that?
Well, when you read into the story, it says he's asking the question, but not necessarily with an eye toward trying to do that anytime soon. What you don't know with this president is that he is, obviously a man of some passions, and the question is, could the same moment of passion that led him to fire Jim Comey lead him to issue the pardon or attempt to fire Mueller or take one of these other steps? Now, it was interesting, in the Times interview, he said again that he does not regret firing Jim Comey. But when you think back to it, it was the firing of Comey that basically brought all of this upon him. It's what forced the Deputy Attorney General to appoint Bob Mueller as a special counsel. It's what then triggered the rest of this set of investigations. Had he kept Comey in place, there would certainly be an FBI investigation underway, but there wouldn't be any of this structure that we're seeing now that clearly the president finds so disturbing. I think the last point, and this goes back to something that Jeff got at before, which is that at the moment that Mueller was appointed, you heard a lot of Republicans saying that he was a perfect choice. He's very nonpartisan. His war record in Vietnam is remarkable. His time as FBI director. And so the president probably realizes that it's going to be an uphill battle to go make the case for partisanship that he's now pushing.
You know, it's interesting. David Sanger says, you don't always know what the president's thinking. In some cases, we know exactly what he's thinking. We know the words conflict of interest are seared on his brain right now, and he seems to be wanting to say it out loud, when he's interviewed with the New York Times and have his people talk about it in articles. And we also know, because again, this was part of his interview and we heard him say it out loud, and then his people have been saying it since, he's very concerned about the parameters of the Bob Mueller, of the special counsel's investigation right now. And the president does not think it should expand into his business dealings, particularly from when he was before he was president. Listen again to the president himself and now the president's staff talking about this.
Mueller was looking at your finances, your family's finances, unrelated to Russia. Is that a red line?
Would that be a breach of what his actual?
I would say yes. Yeah, I would say yes.
I think that the president, the point he's trying to make is that the clear purpose of the Russia investigation is to review Russia's meddling in the election, and that should be the focus of the investigation, nothing beyond that. The president's making clear that the special counsel should not move outside of the scope of the investigation.
David Drucker, the president says he doesn't like to give red lines. That seems like a red line there coming from his mouth and his staff's mouth there, despite the fact that Rod Rosenstein's charge for Robert Mueller, includes matters that might arise during the investigation.
I don't see how you look at an investigation into Russian meddling and how the president's campaign may have been implicated without looking into the president's business dealings, especially because the president has not released his tax returns. And one important thing that David Sanger was getting at here, if the president were to move to fire Robert Mueller, the most anxiety you'd see in Washington would be coming from Capitol Hill, because Republicans do not want to have to deal with this. They'd rather focus on mundane policy matters, important policy matters, but things that are a lot less political, and they don't want to be in a position where they have to act against the president or move against the president, at least not before they've seen a signal from Republican voters that that's what they would like them to do. And so that's who would be most concerned about this, because it would put them in a really difficult political position. And that's why you've heard, some complaints from the Hill about where the Mueller investigation might go, but you haven't heard a lot, because they understand what the scope of the investigation needs to be. And they had shoved this off on Mueller so they could get out of having to have anything to do with it.
So, Jeffrey, the Washington Post is reporting that President Trump has expressed concerns about Mueller getting his tax returns. As you know, the president did not release his tax returns. Legally, can Robert Mueller pull those?
Absolutely. There's no doubt that he can. In fact, in white-collar investigations, it is routine for for prosecutors, assistant U.S. attorneys, to get tax returns as first of all, to investigate whether there are tax offenses that may have been committed, but also as a guide to the assets of the people you are investigating. And frankly, given the fact that what the question of motive is at the heart of this investigation. Why was the Trump campaign so favorably disposed towards Russia? Financial motive is an obvious possibility, so I would find it very hard to imagine that this investigation could be completed without Mueller looking at the president's tax return.
David Sanger, you've been in Washington a long time and covered many administrations. I found this week to be an astounding week from the White House in terms of their messaging. They had the health care debate, and it apparently falling apart, maybe not falling apart in the Senate. And then completely by choice, electively, the president goes to the New York Times and knifes his attorney general, raises the possibility of taking on the special counsel. And now in articles in the New York Times and the Washington Post, someone's floating the idea that the president is considering pardons. This seems to be a White House that has completely lost control of controlling any kind of message here.
Well, message discipline has not been their greatest strength in the 6 months and now a day that they've been in office. When you think about that, it's the other downside of the president's tweeting, the president's determining that he's got to be completely the one who does the communication because he thinks he does it better than anybody else. The tweets, the interviews, and so forth always veer toward what he feels most strongly about at the moment. And he clearly does not view it as a reaction to anything he's done, including the firing of Jim Comey, but instead he views it as an effort to conduct what he's called many times a witch hunt. So that tends to dominate it. So if it's Made in America week, or it's let's focus on the details of healthcare week, his mind is not necessarily right there. And you saw it in the healthcare debate where a number of Republican senators said the president did not seem to be deeply engaged in the details of what the health care bill should look like. In fact, White House didn't have its own. Instead, he just wanted to have a win. And you have to wonder if it doesn't look like he's going to get that, if he'll just move on to the next thing.
Made in America week, when it comes to the Russia investigation and the focus on it right now, it's a Made in the Oval Office week because the president has exclusively, I think, created this renewed focus over the last few days. All right, guys, stick around. President Trump's relationship with Attorney General Jeff Sessions put to the test. The Attorney General says he's not going anywhere. No one would have asked that question if not for the fact that the president gave this remarkable rebuke to the New York Times. Is loyalty a one-way street for President Trump? We discuss next.
New Day, brought to you by Dunkirk from Warner Brothers Pictures. Written and directed by Christopher Nolan. Dunkirk, now playing.
Team Romans, it is Friday morning. Nice to have you here. Dave has the day off, but I get Miguel for the next half hour. 5:30 in the East. Up first, explosive new reporting this morning. The president's lawyers are looking for ways to undermine the Russia investigation by Special Counsel Robert Mueller. The Washington Post and the New York Times report attorneys and aides are scouring the backgrounds of Mueller and his staff, searching for conflicts of interest they can use to undercut the Russia probe. Papers cite several sources familiar with this research effort.
Now, the Washington Post reporting the president is asked about his power to pardon aides, family members, even himself. One advisor told the Post the president was simply curious about the reach of his pardoning authority. This follows the president's earlier attacks on Mueller and other officials connected to the Russia investigation.
Now, with all that in mind, the president is reshuffling the legal team charged with helping him navigate the Russia probe. Two sources tell CNN the president's longtime personal attorney, Mark Kasowitz, will see his role as lead lawyer on the Russia investigation diminish. Now, veteran attorney, Washington attorney John Dowd and another Trump lawyer, Jay Sekulow, will take the lead as the president's personal attorneys on the Russia inquiry.
Sources say by working outside the White House, Dowd and Sekulow's dealings with the president will be protected by the same attorney-client privilege afforded all U.S. citizens. Inside the White House, Attorney Ty Cobb will take the lead on legal and communication strategy for Russia. He'll be effectively replacing communications strategist Mark Carollo, who resigned on Thursday.
All right, let's break all of these new developments down this morning. Political economist Greg Valliere is here, chief strategist at Horizon Investments, and part of his job is to look at what's happening inside the Beltway and what's happening, in global markets and figure out what each means for the other. So he's deeply sourced here for us. Glad to have you here this morning. I want you to listen to something that yesterday we heard from Sarah Huckabee Sanders, one of the president's spokeswomen, about the special counsel and the scope of the investigation in particular.
I think that the president, the point he's trying to make is that the clear purpose of the Russia investigation is to review Russia's meddling in the election, and that should be the focus of the investigation, nothing beyond that. The president's making clear that the special counsel should not move outside of the scope of the investigation.
Greg, I want to quote something that was in the Washington Post that I think is fascinating about his tax returns in particular, and I think they relate here. Trump has been fuming about the probe in recent weeks as he has been informed about the legal questions that he and his family could face. He has told aides he was especially disturbed after learning Mueller would be able to access several years of his tax returns. The president has Russia fever. He blames the press for making this about nothing, but he has Russia fever here.
Christine, he almost single-handedly is keeping the story alive. He reignited this firestorm with the New York Times 2 or 3 days ago in the interview. Unfortunately for him, he cannot pick and choose what gets investigated. That's up to Mueller. And I do think that there's something about Trump's tax returns that gets him extremely agitated. I don't think it's that he didn't pay any taxes. I think we all know that. I think his tax returns list sources where he has money, where he owes money. And I think some of those sources are in Russia.
It seems so simple. The more you tell the cop, don't look in the basement, the more the cop wants to look in the basement. It's absolutely bizarre.
And any investigator, follow the money is rule number one of any investigation. Follow the money, right?
Indeed. In that New York Times article and wide-ranging interview you mentioned, he didn't exactly express his love for the Attorney General who has been with him, Jeff Sessions, through thick and thin, very early on his campaign. Basically said he wouldn't have picked him if he knew that he was going to recuse himself from Russia. Here's what Jeff Sessions had to say about that.
I have the honor of serving as Attorney General. It's something that goes beyond any thought I would have ever had for myself. We love this job, we love this department, and I plan to continue to do so as long as that is appropriate.
As long as it's appropriate.
Right.
Reading the tea leaves even from this distance, it doesn't sound exactly like confidence.
No, Miguel, and I would say that when it comes to Sessions, this is still another example of how a lot of quality people don't want to go to work in this administration. Because if the president is willing to throw Sessions under the bus, what does that say about other people who may decide maybe it's not worth my while to join this group?
There are some Republicans who have been telling me that while all this is happening, there's real work being done behind the scenes. That Stephen Mnuchin is moving forward on plans for tax reform. That Paul Ryan is working on, with House Republicans on their budget proposal or their budget that the committee has already passed. Well, is that true? Is there work being done? And do you see the president's policy agenda slowly moving forward, or is all of this noise slowing his policy agenda?
I think the agenda is moving a bit on taxes, maybe in spite of him rather than because of him. But I do think that there's some real progress being made by Mnuchin, Congressman Brady, head of the Ways and Means Committee, Paul Ryan. I do think that we'll get a tax outline this fall and we'll see progress there. Unfortunately for them, they first have to get some budget issues resolved, and that could be almost as contentious as the health care stuff.
Greg, we've seen these theme weeks. This week is Made in America week. And sometimes, they have these like nice events where they can promote something. They promoted this new injectable glass thing yesterday, which is fair. It's going to be 4,000 jobs. That's legit. Yet on the same day, Mar-a-Lago and a golf course in Jupiter, Florida, owned by the Trump family. They're filing for more foreign workers. So the buy American, hire American, except if you're one of my companies. Does that stuff undermine his message?
It does. I think that it's really hard for him to stay on message. That's one of the problems. But I should say for the markets, you made a really good point. I think there's some progress being made behind the scenes. I think there's a very pro-business climate here in Washington. The economic fundamentals are really quite excellent right now. So there are a lot of positives for the markets. The one thing that I think could really unnerve the markets is if it started to look like tax reform was dead. We're not there yet. I think we'll get a tax bill, but chances of a big tax bill have diminished over the last month or so.
3 months till open enrollment also for Obamacare. Don't know what's happening
and midterms coming up and health care not happening, so you're not going to have all those savings that they were counting on from health care. It looks like whatever they were going to do on tax reform is going to be a heck of a lot smaller than they were imagining just a few months ago.
That's right. Yep.
All right.
Greg Valliere, have a great weekend.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks for stopping by this morning. All right, the U.S. is fining ExxonMobil for violating Russian sanctions while Secretary of State Rex Tillerson was still in charge. The Treasury Department is slapping a $2 million fine on Exxon, claiming it demonstrated reckless disregard for those Russia sanctions. This all stems from a 2014 deal between Exxon executives and this man, Igor Sechin. Sechin runs Rosneft. That's the Russia state-run oil company. He's a close ally of Russian President Vladimir Putin.
The Treasury Department didn't specify which Exxon executives were involved and didn't name Tillerson. Tillerson stepped down as CEO last year, but had personal business dealings with Session when he ran ExxonMobil. And this move raises concerns over his deep business ties to Russia. Exxon says the fine is fundamentally unfair.
Another record high for the NASDAQ. NASDAQ has never been this high. It's the third record in a row. This is the longest winning streak since 2015. It's evidence investors are unfazed by President Trump's political troubles because huge corporate profits are driving stocks higher. More on that in a few moments. It is still Made in America week, and the president is wrapping it up by touting a deal between these three companies, pharmaceutical companies Pfizer and Merck, and manufacturer Corning. Together, they will produce a new type of glass for injectable drugs.
Pharmaceutical glass packaging will now be made in America. That's a big step. That's a big statement. I'm very proud of that. Thank you very much, by the way. And I know they wouldn't have done it under another administration.
Okay, that's an important deliverable for Made in America week. Until now, 98% of pharmaceutical glass packaging was made overseas. But this program has been in the works since 2012. So the president, that last sort of unscripted comment he made doesn't hold there. Corning will invest $500 million initially, but that investment is expected to grow to $4 billion, creating at least 4,000 new high-tech jobs. The CEOs of Pfizer, Merck, and Corning were present at the announcement. The companies still need federal government approval to move forward with the deal, including approval from the FDA for the product itself.
Now, O.J. Simpson, he will be out of prison.
Lincoln Park. Will the special counsel probe lead to presidential pardons? The new reports breaking down the White House's new battle plan.
Shaking things up, the big reason behind big changes in the president's legal team.
And he's set for parole, but still creating controversy. What O.J. Simpson said about his past before a panel decided his future. Welcome back to Early Start this Friday morning. I'm Christine Roman.
Friday. Happy Friday to you. I'm Miguel Marquez. It is 30 minutes past the hour. Up first, explosive new reporting this morning. The president's lawyers are looking for ways to undermine the Russia investigation by special counsel Robert Mueller. The Washington Post and New York Times report attorneys and aides are scouring the backgrounds of Mueller and his staff, searching for conflicts of interest they can use to undercut the Russia probe. The papers cite several sources familiar with the research effort.
The Washington Post also reporting the president has asked about his power to pardon aides, family members, even himself. One advisor told the Post the president was simply curious about the reach of his pardoning authority. This follows the president's earlier attacks on Mueller and other officials connected to the Russia investigation. CNN's Jeff Zeleny has more this morning for us from the White House.
Christine and Miguel, President Trump and the White House increasingly focused on that special counsel's investigation, that independent investigation into the Russian meddling of the.
You know, first of all, he said we're not aware of any of this. Secondly, he raised the question that he thought that, you know, what we reported indicates that the special counsel is going beyond